Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Louisiana Bayou, with its Spanish moss and murky waters, holds secrets that surface only in darkness. For game wardens who patrol these waterways after sunset, the night brings encounters that defy explanation. These are the calls that keep them awake long after their shift ends. Now, let us begin with our first story. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries employs over 200 game wardens across the state's 64 parishes. Their jurisdiction covers everything from illegal hunting to missing persons in the vast wetlands that comprise nearly 1/3 of Louisiana's land area. While most calls are routine violations, some night shift reports have found their way into confidential files, marked only with timestamps and brief explanations that raise more questions than answers. The 7 accounts we'll explore tonight come from these internal records, all verified by multiple witnesses and documented evidence that has never been made public until now. In the bayou, darkness falls differently. The thick canopy of cypress trees filters moonlight into scattered silver patches on water black as oil. The air grows heavy with humidity and the scent of decay and rebirth that defines these wetlands. It's in this environment that game wardens like Marc Dubois, Sarah Chenier, and others have recorded encounters that challenge our understanding of the natural world. These are not tales of monsters or supernatural beings, but documented incidents that left experienced outdoorsmen questioning what truly lurks beneath the surface of America's most mysterious landscape. It was late October of 2012 when game warden Marc Dubois first encountered what would become known as the Whispering Reeds incident. The Atchafalaya Basin stretched before him, a maze of waterways and floating vegetation that had tested his navigation skills for the better part of his 12-year career. The night was unusually still, with no breeze to stir the Spanish moss hanging from cypress branches like ghostly curtains. His patrol boat cut through the water with a low thrum that usually sent frogs and birds into silence. But tonight, even the wildlife seemed absent. Marc had taken the night shift to cover for a colleague recovering from surgery. The routine was familiar: check fishing licenses, monitor for illegal hunting, and respond to any emergency calls from locals navigating the treacherous waters. Most nights passed with little excitement, punctuated by the occasional drunk boater or fisherman using illegal nets. But this particular evening felt different from the moment he launched his vessel at the Henderson Landing. The air was heavier than usual, pressing against his skin with a thickness that made breathing deliberate. Even his flashlight beam seemed weaker tonight, absorbed by the oppressive darkness that surrounded him. The bayou at night is never truly silent. Frogs croak in chorus, insects buzz incessantly, fish break the surface with soft splashes, and distant motors echo across the water. But as Marc navigated toward the northern section of his patrol area, a profound silence fell over the basin. The familiar sounds of nightlife vanished one by one until only the hum of his engine remained. He stopped the boat, killing the motor to listen. Nothing, not even the chirping of crickets. The absence of sound was more unsettling than any noise he could imagine. Something had silenced the entire ecosystem, and that something was still out there in the darkness. That's when he first heard it, a soft rustling from the reeds along the western bank. Not the sound of wind moving through vegetation, but something more deliberate, a rhythmic brushing, like someone running their hand through the tall grasses. Marc grabbed his spotlight, sweeping the beam across the water's edge. The reeds stood perfectly still, yet the sound continued. He radioed dispatch to report his location, noting the unusual quiet in his logbook. The dispatcher's voice came through with static, unusually distant despite the short range. "Everything okay out there, Marc?" the voice asked. "Just checking on some unusual activity," he replied, though he couldn't yet identify what he was witnessing. The whispering grew more distinct as he drifted closer to shore. It wasn't just rustling anymore, there were voices in the reeds, faint and indistinct, like multiple people speaking just beyond his range of hearing. Mark had encountered poachers before, but they never operated with this level of stealth. He pulled his service weapon from its holster, keeping it low as he listened. The voices seemed to be speaking in a language he couldn't identify, though something about the cadence felt familiar yet wrong. When he swept the spotlight across the reeds again, he caught movement, not human figures, but the reeds themselves, bending inward as if something large were moving through them, yet leaving no visible trail. The temperature dropped suddenly, enough that Mark could see his breath in the beam of his flashlight. The water around his boat grew still, losing even the gentle ripple caused by his earlier movement. The whispering voices rose in volume, though still too muffled to distinguish words. Then came the sound that would haunt him for years, to follow a clear, childlike laugh from directly behind his boat. Mark spun around, weapon raised, but found only empty water. The laugh came again, this time from the opposite side of his vessel. He was surrounded, yet alone. What happened next was documented in his official report and later corroborated by physical evidence. The boat began to rock gently, though no waves or currents were visible. The whispering voices rose to a crescendo, forming words Mark could finally understand. Go home, go home, go home. The repetition was mechanical, without emotion. When he tried to restart his engine, it wouldn't turn over. His radio crackled with static, the dispatcher's voice breaking through intermittently. Mark, your location, responding. The boat continued to rock more violently as unseen hands seemed to push against the hull. Mark found himself standing, weapon pointed into the darkness, shouting into the night. Who's out there? Show yourselves! The only response was the continued chanting and laughter from multiple directions. His flashlight beam flickered and died, leaving him in near total darkness, except for the dim glow from his console. That's when he felt something cold touch the back of his neck, not water, not air, but something solid that withdrew as quickly as it appeared. He fired 2 shots into the darkness, the sound echoing unnaturally across the silent water. The engine suddenly roared to life on its own. Mark didn't wait to question his luck, gunning the throttle and speeding away from the area. The whispering voices followed him for nearly a mile before gradually fading into the normal sounds of the bayou. When he finally reached the landing, his hands were shaking too badly to secure the boat properly. The incident report filed at 2:17 a.m. noted unexplained voices, equipment malfunction, and a temperature drop of 23 degrees in less than 10 minutes verified by the boat's built-in thermometer. Mark Dubois never took another night shift in the Atchafalaya Basin. 6 months later, during a routine daytime patrol, he returned to the area of the encounter and found something peculiar. A perfect circle approximately 15 feet in diameter where no vegetation grew, despite the lush reeds and grasses surrounding it. Soil samples collected by the department showed no explanation for the barren patch, which remained devoid of plant life for 3 years before slowly returning to normal. Mark never spoke of the incident again, except in official reports, but other wardens began avoiding that section of the basin after dark. The whispering reeds became a legend among those who patrol the bayou, a warning that some nights are best spent ashore. It was just after midnight on August 3, 2015, when Game Warden Sarah Chenier received a call about unusual activity on Caddo Lake. The caller, an elderly fisherman named Henri Boudreau, reported seeing something that doesn't belong near Goat Island. Sarah had been with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries for 8 years, specializing in waterway enforcement. She knew the lake's murky waters and bald cypress forests better than most, having grown up in the nearby town of Oil City. The call itself wasn't unusual. Locals often reported strange sights in the fog-shrouded waters, but Henry's voice carried an urgency that made her pay attention. The night was oppressively hot, with humidity so thick that Sarah's uniform clung to her skin the moment she stepped outside. Her patrol boat, a 20-foot flat-bottom vessel equipped for shallow water navigation, cut through the pea soup fog that rolled across the lake's surface. The boat's spotlight created a tunnel of visibility in the otherwise impenetrable darkness. As she approached the coordinates Henri had provided, Sarah noticed something odd. The usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife were absent. Even the bullfrogs, whose croaking normally echoed across the water at this hour, were silent. Sarah radioed dispatch to report her arrival at Goat Island, noting the unusual quiet in her logbook. The dispatcher's response came through with minimal static, a small mercy in an area where radio communication was notoriously unreliable. "Anything to report?" the voice asked. "Not yet," Sarah replied, but Henri sounded genuinely spooked, and that's not like him. She cut the engine, allowing the boat to drift in the still water while she listened. The silence was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat, a steady rhythm that seemed to amplify in the absence of any other sound. That's when she first saw it, a pale glow emanating from behind the island, visible even through the thick fog. It wasn't the warm yellow of a flashlight or campfire, but a cold blue-white light that seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Sarah grabbed her binoculars, trying to penetrate the fog, but the light remained indistinct. She noted the time, 12:47 a.m., and the bearing in her logbook before restarting the engine and moving cautiously toward the source of the illumination. The boat's depth sounder showed rapidly decreasing depth, forcing her to slow her approach even further. As she rounded the northern tip of Goat Island, the fog seemed to part momentarily, revealing something that made Sarah question her senses. Floating approximately 3 feet above the water's surface was a sphere of light, approximately 6 feet in diameter, perfectly spherical and emitting no heat that she could detect. It moved slowly toward the island, bobbing gently as if on an invisible current. Sarah cut the engine again, reaching for her camera, but when she looked through the viewfinder, the sphere appeared as only a blurry patch of light, refusing to come into focus despite the camera's attempts to adjust. The sphere stopped moving and hovered silently over a small cove. Sarah watched, mesmerized, as the light began to change shape, elongating vertically before flattening into a disc shape. Then, without warning, it shot straight up into the air, disappearing into the fog cover in less than 2 seconds. Sarah radioed dispatch immediately. "You're not going to believe this," she began, "but I just saw—" Her voice trailed off as she noticed something moving beneath the surface where the sphere had been hovering. Ripples spread across the water, though nothing had fallen from above. Sarah approached cautiously, using her spotlight to pierce the murky water. The beam revealed something extraordinary, a perfect circle approximately 20 feet in diameter, where the vegetation on the lake bottom had been flattened, as if by immense pressure. The water within this circle was noticeably clearer than the surrounding area, despite Caddo Lake's notorious turbidity. She lowered a waterproof camera into the water, documenting what she saw. The images would later show vegetation compressed in a radial pattern, with the center of the circle appearing almost scoured clean. What happened next was documented in Sarah's official report and later verified by satellite imagery. As she was preparing to collect water samples from the anomalous area, the sphere returned without warning, descending from above and stopping directly over her boat. The light was so bright that Sarah had to shield her eyes, even though it produced no discernible heat. The boat's electrical systems failed simultaneously, engine, radio, and GPS all going dead. Sarah found herself floating in darkness beneath the silent, hovering sphere, completely isolated and unable to call for help. The sphere remained above her for approximately 3 minutes by Sarah's estimation, though time seemed to distort in its presence. During this period, she experienced a profound sense of being examined, as if invisible eyes were scanning not just her body, but her thoughts as well. When the sphere finally ascended rapidly and disappeared, her boat's systems restarted on their own. The engine turned over, the radio crackled back to life, and the GPS recalibrated its position. Sarah immediately radioed dispatch with a garbled report that would later be transcribed as unexplained aerial phenomenon with electromagnetic effects. Sarah collected water samples from the anomalous area before departing, following protocol despite her shaken state. Laboratory analysis would later reveal unusual concentrations of elements not typically found in Caddo Lake water, including trace amounts of titanium and aluminum in patterns that suggested rapid cooling from extreme temperatures. The vegetation samples showed cellular damage consistent with exposure to intense radiation, though no radioactive isotopes were detected. The official report, filed under incident number 150803C, remains classified, though Sarah has shared her experience with a handful of colleagues. In the weeks following the incident, Sarah experienced recurring nightmares and developed an unexplained sensitivity to electromagnetic fields. She requested a transfer to a desk position 6 months later, citing medical reasons. Other game wardens who patrolled Caddo Lake reported similar sightings over the next 2 years, though none experienced the close encounter that Sarah had. The area where the sphere hovered remains barren to this day, with aquatic life avoiding the location despite the surrounding abundance. Sarah Chenier never returned to night patrol, but she continues to advocate for documentation of unexplained phenomena encountered by wildlife officers, believing that the Bayou holds secrets that science has yet to explain. It was approaching 2 in the morning on November 1st, 2018, when Game Warden Marcus Thibodeau spotted what would become known as the Phantom Boat on Lake Pontchartrain. Marcus had been with the department for 15 years, spending most of his career patrolling the massive lake that separated New Orleans from the rest of Louisiana. Halloween night had been uneventful, with only a handful of calls about intoxicated boaters and one minor incident involving illegal fishing nets. As the holiday faded into All Saints' Day, Marcus found himself alone on the water, guiding his vessel along the southern shoreline near Mandeville. The weather had turned unexpectedly cold for early November, with a north wind dropping temperatures into the 40s. Marcus wore his heavy uniform jacket, but the chill seemed to penetrate the fabric, settling deep in his bones. Fog rolled across the lake's surface, creating a disorienting blanket of gray that obscured the shoreline and made navigation challenging. The lake's normally gentle waves were flattened by the still air, creating a mirror-like surface that reflected the dim moonlight in eerie patterns. Marcus had patrolled these waters in every weather condition imaginable, but something about this particular night felt different, as if the lake itself were holding its breath. As he rounded the point near Lewisburg, Marcus noticed something unusual. A boat running without lights, heading west along the shoreline at a steady pace. This violated multiple safety regulations, and Marcus prepared to intercept the vessel. He increased speed, closing the distance between them, but as he drew closer, he realized something was wrong. The boat appeared to be an older model, perhaps from the 1950s or 60s, with a wooden hull and a small cabin. Its engine made no sound, yet it moved through the water at approximately 15 knots. Marcus grabbed his spotlight, training it on the vessel, but the beam seemed to pass through the boat as if it weren't there. Marcus radioed dispatch to report the strange vessel. "I'm pursuing a boat with no running lights near Lewisburg," he said. "Approximately 25 feet, wooden hull, classic design, not responding to hails." The dispatcher's voice came through with minimal static. "Can you get a registration number?" she asked. Marcus tried to focus his binoculars on the boat's stern, but the numbers appeared to shift and change as he watched. "Negative," he replied. "The registration seems to be changing." As he spoke, the boat suddenly veered north, heading directly toward the center of the lake. Marcus followed, maintaining a safe distance. The phantom boat continued its silent journey, cutting through the fog with impossible speed. Marcus checked his radar, which showed no other vessels in the area despite the clear visual of the boat ahead. He tried taking photographs with his department-issued camera, but each image showed only empty water where the boat should have been. The temperature in his cabin dropped suddenly, and frost formed on the inside of his windows despite the heating system running at full capacity. As they approached the middle of the lake, approximately 5 miles from shore, the phantom boat suddenly stopped and began to turn slowly in a circle. Marcus cut his engine, drifting as he watched. The boat completed 3 perfect circles before stopping again, facing directly toward Marcus's vessel. A figure emerged from the cabin, a tall man wearing what appeared to be old-fashioned fishing attire, complete with a hat and suspenders. The figure waved slowly in Marcus's direction, though its face remained indistinct in the fog. Marcus felt a cold dread wash over him, unlike anything he had experienced in his years of law enforcement. He reached for his radio to call for backup, but his hand froze as the phantom boat began moving again directly toward him. There was still no sound from its engine, no wake trailing behind it, just impossible motion across the still water. Marcus tried to restart his engine, but the motor sputtered and died. His radio emitted only static, and all electronic systems in his boat failed simultaneously. The phantom boat stopped approximately 50 feet from Marcus's vessel. The figure on deck raised one arm and pointed toward the southern horizon. Marcus followed the gesture, his eyes widening as he saw what the figure was indicating, a massive waterspout forming where clear skies had been moments before. The waterspout moved toward them with unnatural speed, though the weather radar showed no such formation. Marcus realized with chilling certainty that the phantom boat had saved him from a disaster he couldn't have predicted. When Marcus looked back at the other vessel, it was fading, becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. The electronic systems in his boat suddenly restarted, the engine turning over with a roar. Marcus didn't hesitate, gunning the throttle and racing back toward the safety of the shoreline. Behind him, the waterspout dissipated as quickly as it had formed, leaving only gently rippling water where it had been. He radioed dispatch with a report that would later be classified as unexplained maritime phenomenon with possible life-saving intervention. Marcus documented the incident in his logbook, noting the impossible nature of the phantom boat and its timely warning. The official report, filed under incident number 18-11-01P, included radar data showing no other vessels in the area and weather records confirming the sudden formation and dissipation of the waterspout. Photographs taken during the encounter showed only empty water, though analysis later revealed unusual electromagnetic readings in the images where the phantom boat should have appeared. In the weeks following the incident, Marcus researched Lake Pontchartrain's maritime history, discovering several reports of boats disappearing under mysterious circumstances in the same area where he had encountered the phantom vessel. Most notable was the disappearance of the Mississippi Queen, a fishing boat that vanished during a storm in November of 1962 with 3 crewmen aboard. The description of the phantom boat matched the Mississippi Queen almost exactly, leading Marcus to wonder if he had encountered a ghostly echo of the past. Marcus Thibodeau continued his patrols on Lake Pontchartrain for another 2 years before retiring. He never saw the phantom boat again, though other wardens reported similar sightings over the following months. The incident changed his perspective on the unexplained phenomena that sometimes occurred in the vast waters of Louisiana. "I spent 15 years thinking I knew everything about this lake," he told a colleague shortly before his retirement. "But that night taught me that some things are beyond our understanding. We're not always the ones in charge out there." The phantom boat of Lake Pontchartrain remains one of the most compelling mysteries in the annals of Louisiana game warden encounters, a reminder that even in modern times, the waters hold secrets that defy explanation. It was the early hours of March 17, 2019, when game warden Ben Romero encountered what would later be documented as the Alligator Man in Honey Island Swamp. Ben had transferred from Louisiana's northern parishes just 6 months prior, seeking what he called a change of pace. The swamp, with its 70,000 acres of pristine wilderness, presented challenges far different from the lakes and rivers he had previously patrolled. This particular night found him navigating the narrow waterways near the Pearl River, responding to reports of illegal hunting activity in the protected area. The spring night was unseasonably warm, with humidity so thick that Ben's uniform felt like a second skin. His airboat cut through the dark water, the giant fan propelling him forward with a deafening roar that sent nocturnal creatures scattering into the undergrowth. The swamp was alive with sounds, frogs croaking in chorus, insects buzzing incessantly, and the occasional splash of something moving beneath the water's surface. Ben had learned to identify these sounds during his months in the swamp, but tonight, something seemed off. The normal chorus of wildlife was punctuated by an unusual silence in certain areas, as if something were moving through the swamp, silencing everything in its path. Ben stopped his airboat near the location where the alleged illegal hunting had been reported, cutting the engine and allowing the swamp's natural sounds to return. He listened carefully, his trained ears searching for any sign of human activity. Instead, he heard something else, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. It wasn't the sound of any animal he recognized, neither bear, nor alligator, nor wild boar. It was something deeper, more resonant, with a quality that seemed almost human. Ben grabbed his spotlight, sweeping the beam across the dark water and towering cypress trees, but found nothing unusual. That's when he first noticed the tracks along the muddy bank, large footprints that appeared almost human in shape, but with distinctive reptilian characteristics. They were enormous, at least 16 inches long, with 3 forward-facing toes and a backward-pointing dew claw that left a deep impression in the mud. Ben had seen alligator tracks countless times, but these were different, too large, too defined, and arranged in a pattern that suggested bipedal movement. He photographed the tracks with his department camera, noting their size and distinctive characteristics in his logbook. As Ben followed the tracks inland, he noticed something disturbing. The swamp vegetation was crushed in a path approximately 4 feet wide, as if something very heavy had passed through recently. The broken branches and flattened grasses were still moist, indicating the passage had occurred within the hour. Ben radioed dispatch to report his findings. "I'm tracking something unusual near the Pearl River," he said. "Large bipedal tracks, approximately 16 inches long. Reptilian characteristics, but with a human stride pattern." The dispatcher's response came through with static. "Any idea what made them?" she asked. "Negative," Ben replied. "But whatever it is, it's big." The growling sound returned, closer this time, accompanied by the strong smell of rot and stagnant water that seemed out of place even in a swamp environment. Ben drew his service weapon, moving cautiously along the path of crushed vegetation. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing more tracks and occasional patches of what appeared to be scaly skin, shed like a snake's but in much larger pieces. Ben collected samples of these skin fragments, placing them in evidence bags for later analysis. What happened next was documented in Ben's official report and later corroborated by physical evidence. As he rounded a bend in the waterway, Ben saw movement in the trees ahead, a large figure that moved with surprising speed despite its apparent size. The spotlight caught it for just a moment. A humanoid creature standing at least 7 feet tall, covered in what appeared to be dark green scales, with a head that resembled an alligator's but with more defined features. The creature turned toward him, its eyes reflecting the light with a reddish glow before disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Ben stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. He had heard stories of the Honey Island swamp monster from locals and fellow wardens, but had dismissed them as folklore-exaggerated tales born from the swamp's mysterious atmosphere. Now, faced with physical evidence and a visual sighting, he found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The creature he had seen defied classification, existing somewhere between human and reptile, myth and reality. The sound of splashing water snapped Ben back to attention. He turned his flashlight toward the sound, catching sight of the creature again as it entered the water approximately 50 yards away. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its size, submerging itself without creating the disturbance Ben would have expected from something so large. He radioed dispatch immediately. "I've made visual contact with whatever is making those tracks," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen, heading south along the Pearl River." The dispatcher's response came through with concern. "Are you safe, Ben?" she asked. "I think so," he replied, "but I'm heading back to the landing. This is beyond my training." Ben returned to the landing without further incident, though he felt watched the entire way. The evidence he had collected, photographs of tracks, samples of skin fragments, and his own eyewitness testimony would later be analyzed by the department's biological consultants. The skin samples contained DNA markers that matched both human and alligator genetic material, though in proportions that should be impossible according to current scientific understanding. The tracks were analyzed by wildlife biologists who concluded they could not have been made by any known species. The official report, filed under Incident Number 1903 by 17H, remains classified, though Ben has shared his experience with a handful of trusted colleagues. In the weeks following the encounter, he experienced intense scrutiny from department officials who questioned his credibility despite the physical evidence. 6 months after the incident, Ben requested a transfer back to northern Louisiana, citing personal reasons. He never patrolled the Honey Island swamp again, though he continues to believe that what he encountered that night was real. Other game wardens have reported similar sightings in the Honey Island swamp over the years, though none have had such close encounters or collected such compelling evidence. The creature Ben Romero saw has become known as the Alligator Man in department files, a designation that attempts to categorize something that defies easy explanation. For Ben, the experience changed his perspective on the natural world and humanity's place within it. "We think we know everything about the wilderness," he told a friend shortly after his transfer. "But there are still places where the old things survive, creatures that exist between categories, waiting in the darkness for moments like that night when someone like me stumbles upon them." It was just after 1 in the morning on June 23, 2020, when Game Warden Elena Rodriguez responded to a call about a mysterious structure in Maurepas Swamp. The caller, a commercial fisherman named Jean-Louis Baptiste, reported seeing a cabin that wasn't there yesterday, while checking his crawfish traps near the mouth of the Blind River. Elena had been with the department for 5 years, spending most of that time patrolling the swamps and wetlands of southeastern Louisiana. She knew these waterways intimately, or so she thought, until Jean-Louis's call came in. The summer night was thick with humidity and the drone of insects that seemed to penetrate even the soundproofing of Elena's airboat. The full moon cast a silvery glow across the water, creating an ethereal landscape of shadows and reflections. Elena followed the coordinates Jean-Louis had provided, navigating the narrow channels with practiced ease. The swamp was alive with its usual nocturnal symphony, frogs croaking, owls hooting, and the occasional splash of alligators sliding into the water. Everything seemed normal as she approached the area where the mysterious cabin had been sighted. Elena spotted it from a distance, a small wooden structure perched on stilts above the water, approximately 20 feet by 30 feet in size. It appeared old but well-maintained, with a tin roof and a small porch complete with a rocking chair that moved gently despite the still air. Elena radioed dispatch to report her findings. "I've located the structure Jean-Louis called about," she said. "It's a cabin on stilts. Looks like it's been here for years, though I've never seen it before." The dispatcher's response came through with minimal static. "Any signs of occupation?" she asked. "Not that I can see," Elena replied, "though there's a light in the window." Elena secured her airboat to a nearby cypress tree and approached cautiously, her hand resting on the service weapon at her hip. The cabin's porch creaked under her weight, though the wood appeared solid and well-constructed. She knocked on the door, calling out, "Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, is anyone home?" The only response was the continued gentle motion of the rocking chair, which seemed to move with more purpose now, as if someone had just risen from it. Elena tried the doorknob, finding it unlocked. The cabin's interior was surprisingly clean and well-kept, with simple wooden furniture and a cast-iron wood stove in the corner. A kerosene lamp burned on a small table, casting a warm glow across the room. Elena noted the lack of dust or cobwebs, suggesting recent occupation despite the absence of personal items. A half-empty coffee mug sat on the table, still warm to the touch. Elena checked the other rooms, a small bedroom with a neatly made bed and a bathroom with modern fixtures, but found no signs of the cabin's occupant. What was particularly strange was the complete absence of any identifying information, no mail, no photographs, no personal belongings that might indicate who lived here. Elena checked the cabin's foundation and construction, noting that the stilts appeared recently installed, with no weathering or water damage despite their location in the swamp. The building materials seemed too new for a structure that should have been exposed to the elements for years. Elena photographed everything, documenting the strange cabin in detail for her report. As Elena was preparing to leave, she noticed something odd. A series of symbols carved into the floorboards near the door. They didn't match any language she recognized, appearing more like mathematical equations or some form of code. She photographed these as well, though something about them made her uneasy. The cabin's atmosphere had changed during her investigation, the air had grown colder, and the insects outside had fallen silent. Elena felt a sudden urge to leave, a primal instinct that told her she wasn't welcome here. That's when she heard the floorboards creak in the bedroom. Elena drew her weapon, moving slowly toward the doorway. "Who's there?" she called out. "This is the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. You need to show yourself." The only response was the sound of footsteps moving toward the back of the cabin, followed by the soft click of a door closing. Elena entered the bedroom to find it empty, though the back door stood slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. Elena approached the back door cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The door opened onto a small porch with steps leading down to the water, but there was no boat tied up, no apparent way for whoever had been in the cabin to leave. Elena swept her light across the surrounding water, finding nothing but the usual reflections of moonlight on the dark surface. She radioed dispatch to update them on the situation. "Someone was definitely here," she said. "But they're gone now. No boat that I can see." What happened next was documented in Elena's official report and later verified by satellite imagery. As Elena was about to leave the cabin, she noticed the light in the main room flickering and changing color from warm yellow to cold blue. The temperature dropped suddenly, and frost formed on the inside of the windows. Elena felt a strange sensation, as if the cabin were vibrating though nothing was moving. When she looked out the front window, she saw something impossible. The cabin was rising slowly into the air, stilts and all, lifting above the water without any visible means of support. Elena didn't hesitate, rushing out the front door and onto the porch. The cabin continued to ascend, reaching approximately 50 feet above the water before stopping. Elena looked down, realizing with horror that she was trapped aboard the floating structure. She radioed dispatch frantically. "You're not going to believe this," she began, "but the cabin is flying. I'm on it, and I don't know how to get down." The dispatcher's response came through with concern. "Say again, Elena. Your transmission is breaking up." Elena tried to repeat herself, but her radio emitted only static. The cabin began to move horizontally, drifting slowly over the swamp treetops. Elena lay flat on the porch, gripping the railing as she watched the landscape pass beneath her. The journey lasted approximately 10 minutes by her estimation, though time seemed to distort in the bizarre circumstances. When the cabin finally stopped, it was hovering over a clearing approximately 2 miles from its original location. Then, as slowly as it had risen, it descended back toward the ground, coming to rest in the clearing as if nothing unusual had happened. Elena didn't wait to question what had happened. She scrambled off the porch and ran toward the trees, not stopping until she was safely under the cover of the forest. When she looked back, the cabin was still there, sitting in the clearing as if it had always been there. Elena used her GPS to determine her location before radioing dispatch with a garbled report that would later be transcribed as "unexplained aerial phenomenon involving structure relocation." Elena made her way back to her airboat through the swamp, arriving at the landing just as dawn was breaking. She filed her report immediately, including the photographs she had taken and the GPS coordinates of both the original and final locations of the cabin. When other wardens returned to the clearing later that day, they found only an empty space where the cabin had been. No foundation, no debris, no indication that anything had ever been there. The original location was similarly empty, with no evidence that a structure had ever stood on the stilts that remained embedded in the swamp floor. The official report, filed under Incident Number 200623M, remains classified, though Elena has shared her experience with a handful of trusted colleagues. Laboratory analysis of the photographs revealed unusual energy readings around the cabin, though the images themselves showed nothing out of the ordinary. The symbols Elena had photographed on the floorboards were analyzed by linguists and cryptographers who concluded they didn't match any known language or code system. Elena Rodriguez continued her patrols in the Maurepas swamp for another year before requesting a transfer to the department's research division. She never saw the mysterious cabin again, though other wardens reported similar sightings of temporary structures in the swamp over the following months. The experience changed Elena's perspective on the unexplained phenomena that sometimes occurred in Louisiana's wildest areas. "I spent 5 years thinking I understood the swamp," she told a colleague shortly after her transfer. "But that night taught me that there are still places where the normal rules don't apply. We're not always dealing with just nature out there. Sometimes we're dealing with something else entirely." It was approaching 3 in the morning on September 9th, 2021, when Game Warden Thomas LeBlanc received what would become the most disturbing call of his career. Thomas had been with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries for 20 years, spending the last decade as the senior warden responsible for Manchac Swamp. The swamp, with its dark history and reputation for paranormal activity, had long been a source of strange stories among locals and law enforcement alike. Thomas had heard them all and dismissed most as folklore until the night of the silent caller. The late summer night was unusually cool, with a light breeze that carried the scent of rain from the Gulf of Mexico. Thomas was completing his final patrol of the night, navigating the narrow channels that wound through the swamp's dense vegetation. His airboat moved through the dark water with a familiar rhythm, the giant fan propelling him forward with a roar that sent ripples across the surface. The swamp was alive with its usual nocturnal sounds: frogs, insects, and the occasional splash of alligators sliding into the water. Everything seemed normal as Thomas approached the area known as the Devil's Backbone, a particularly remote section of the swamp. That's when his radio crackled to life with a call that would later defy all explanation. The dispatcher's voice came through with unusual clarity. "Thomas, we have a report of a distress call from Sector 7. Coordinates match your current location." Thomas checked his GPS, noting that he was indeed in the specified sector. "I'm here," he replied, "but I haven't heard anything. What's the nature of the call?" The dispatcher's response was puzzling. "That's just it, we don't know. The call came in on Channel 9, which hasn't been used in 30 years. The voice said only one word: help, and then the line went dead." Thomas cut his engine, allowing the swamp's natural sounds to return. He listened carefully, his trained ears searching for any sign of distress. The only sounds were the usual chorus of nighttime wildlife. Thomas radioed dispatch again. "I'm not seeing or hearing anything unusual," he said. "Are you sure about those coordinates?" The dispatcher's response came through with static. "Positive, Thomas. The call was definitely from this location." The voice was strange, almost mechanical. "Are you sure you're alone out there?" Thomas swept his spotlight across the dark water and towering cypress trees, finding nothing unusual. As Thomas was preparing to move on, he heard something that made his blood run cold, a faint whisper on the wind, barely audible above the swamp's natural sounds. It seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, forming words that were just beyond his ability to comprehend. Thomas grabbed his parabolic microphone, a specialized piece of equipment designed to pick up distant sounds. He aimed it in various directions, adjusting the frequency filters to isolate human voices from the background noise. What he captured would later be analyzed by audio experts who concluded it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The whispering voices formed words in multiple languages, some recognizable and others completely unknown to linguists. Amid this cacophony of voices, one phrase repeated clearly in English: "Let us out." Thomas felt a cold dread wash over him as he realized the implications. Someone or something was trapped in the swamp, calling for help through means that defied normal communication. Thomas radioed dispatch with his findings. "I'm picking up voices on the parabolic mic," he said, his voice steady despite his rising fear. Multiple languages. Some I don't recognize. They're saying, "Let us out," in English. The dispatcher's response came through with concern. "Thomas, there's no record of anyone missing or trapped in that area. Are you sure you're not picking up interference from something?" Thomas played the recording over the radio, listening as the dispatcher fell silent on the other end. "I've never heard anything like that," she said finally. "What do you want to do?" What happened next was documented in Thomas's official report and later verified by audio recordings. As Thomas was deciding whether to investigate further, his spotlight suddenly flickered and died, along with all other electronic systems in his airboat. He found himself in near-total darkness, surrounded only by the moonlight filtering through the cypress canopy and the increasingly loud whispering voices that seemed to be coming closer. Thomas reached for his backup flashlight, but when he turned it on, the beam revealed something impossible: figures standing in the water around his boat, their forms translucent and shimmering like heat haze. The figures appeared human in shape but lacked defining features, their faces smooth and expressionless. They numbered at least a dozen, standing silently in the chest-deep water, their attention focused on Thomas's boat. Thomas felt a profound sense of sorrow emanating from them, along with an overwhelming feeling of loss and desperation. He realized with chilling certainty that these were the spirits of people who had died in the swamp over the years, trapped between worlds and seeking release from their earthly prison. Thomas reached for his radio, intending to call for backup, but his hand froze as one of the figures raised its arm and pointed toward the eastern shore. Thomas followed the gesture, his eyes widening as he saw what the figure was indicating: the remains of an old cabin, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, with a faint light burning in one window. Thomas had patrolled this area hundreds of times but had never seen the cabin before, though now that he noticed it, it seemed as obvious as the moon in the sky. The figures began moving slowly toward the shore, their translucent forms gliding through the water without creating ripples. Thomas felt compelled to follow, though every instinct told him to flee. He started his airboat's manual engine, a backup system that didn't rely on electronics, and followed the spirits toward the mysterious cabin. The journey was short but felt like an eternity, with the whispering voices growing louder with each passing moment. Thomas beached his airboat near the cabin and approached cautiously, his service weapon drawn. The cabin appeared old but well-maintained, with a tin roof and a small porch. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing only darkness within. Thomas pushed it open, stepping into a room that seemed frozen in time. Furniture from the early 20th century stood arranged as if waiting for occupants who might return at any moment. A kerosene lamp burned on a table, casting a warm glow across the room. What Thomas found in the bedroom would haunt him for the rest of his life. A series of photographs dating back to the early 1900s, showing the same group of people in various poses around the cabin. These were the same faces as the translucent figures he had seen in the water, now captured in black and white images that had somehow survived the decades. Thomas realized with horror that he had stumbled upon the final resting place of a family that had disappeared in the swamp nearly a century ago, their fate unknown until this moment. As Thomas was examining the photographs, he heard a floorboard creak behind him. He turned to find an elderly woman standing in the doorway, her form solid and real, unlike the spirits outside. She wore clothing from the early 20th century, though it appeared clean and well-kept. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice carrying the same quality as the whispering voices Thomas had heard earlier. "They've been waiting so long for someone to find them." Thomas stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The woman continued, "My family and I came here in 1912, seeking refuge from a sickness that was sweeping through the nearby town. We thought the swamp would protect us, but something else found us instead. We've been trapped here ever since, between worlds, unable to leave, but unable to fully pass on." She gestured toward the photographs on the bed. "We've been waiting for someone to find us, to tell our story, to release us from this prison." Thomas felt a strange mixture of fear and compassion for the woman and her family. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. The woman smiled sadly. "Just tell our story. Let people know what happened to us. That's all we've wanted for all these years." As she spoke, the cabin began to fade, becoming translucent like the figures Thomas had seen in the water. "Thank you," she said, as her form dissolved into nothingness. "Thank you for finding us." Thomas found himself standing in an empty clearing with no sign of the cabin or its contents. His airboat sat nearby, its electronic systems working normally again. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the swamp. Thomas radioed dispatch with a garbled report that would later be transcribed as "discovery of human remains and historical artifacts in previously unrecorded location." The official investigation that followed would uncover the skeletal remains of 7 individuals in the clearing where Thomas had seen the cabin. Historical records confirmed that a family of 7 had disappeared from the nearby town of Manchac in 1912, their fate unknown until Thomas's discovery. The personal effects found with the remains matched the clothing worn by the figures Thomas had seen, and the photographs he described were discovered among the artifacts, though they crumbled to dust when exposed to air. Thomas LeBlanc retired from the department 6 months after the incident, citing medical reasons related to stress and trauma. He never returned to Manchac Swamp, though he continued to advocate for documentation of unexplained phenomena encountered by wildlife officers. The experience changed his perspective on life, death, and what lies between. "I spent 20 years thinking I knew the swamp," he told a friend shortly after his retirement. "But that night taught me that there are layers of reality we normally can't perceive. Sometimes the dead reach out to the living, not to frighten us, but to find release from their eternal prisons." It was approaching 1 in the morning on April 14, 2023, when Game Warden Jacob Landry heard what would become known as the swamp siren call. Jacob had been with the department for 3 years, a relatively short tenure compared to some of his colleagues, but he had quickly adapted to the unique challenges of patrolling Louisiana's waterways. This particular night found him on Lac des Allemands, a large lake known for its excellent fishing and the occasional reports of strange phenomena that locals attributed to the swamp's unique atmosphere. The spring night was warm and humid, with a light fog that rolled across the lake's surface, creating an ethereal landscape of shadows and reflections. Jacob's patrol boat cut through the dark water with a low thrum that sent ripples across the surface. The lake was alive with its usual nocturnal sounds, frogs croaking in chorus, insects buzzing incessantly, and the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface. Everything seemed normal as Jacob navigated toward the northern section of the lake, checking for illegal fishing activity in the protected spawning areas. That's when he first heard it, a sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, a beautiful melody that was unlike anything Jacob had ever heard. It was a woman's voice, singing in a language he didn't recognize, though something about the cadence felt both ancient and familiar. The melody was haunting and melancholic, with a quality that seemed to penetrate Jacob's defenses, stirring emotions he didn't know he had. He cut his engine, allowing the boat to drift as he listened, his training forgotten in the face of such beauty. Jacob radioed dispatch to report the unusual sound. "I'm hearing what sounds like singing on the lake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A woman's voice, beautiful melody, but I can't identify the language." The dispatcher's response came through with static. "Any visual contact?" she asked. "Negative," Jacob replied. "The fog is too thick. The sound seems to be coming from all directions at once." The dispatcher's voice held a note of concern. "Jacob, be careful. There are stories about this lake, about voices that lure people off course." Jacob dismissed the warning as local folklore, though he couldn't deny the unusual nature of what he was hearing. The singing continued, growing louder and more distinct with each passing moment. Jacob felt compelled to follow the sound, though he couldn't determine its source. He restarted his engine, moving slowly in the direction where the melody seemed strongest. The fog appeared to part before him, creating a clear path across the water, though the surrounding area remained shrouded in mist. As Jacob progressed, he noticed something odd. The lake's usual wildlife had fallen silent. The frogs and insects that normally created a constant backdrop of sound were nowhere to be heard. The only sound was the beautiful, haunting melody that continued to draw him forward. Jacob felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing himself from a distance. He knew he should be more cautious, but the singing had a hypnotic quality that overrode his instincts and training. What happened next was documented in Jacob's official report and later verified by GPS data. As Jacob rounded a small island, he saw a figure standing on the shore, partially obscured by fog. It appeared to be a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Her long dark hair fell to her waist, and her bare feet stood on the muddy bank without sinking. She continued to sing, her voice even more beautiful up close, with a quality that seemed to resonate in Jacob's very bones. Jacob beached his boat, unable to resist the urge to approach the mysterious figure. As he drew closer, he noticed something disturbing. The woman's feet weren't just standing on the mud, they were rooted in it, as if she were a part of the landscape itself. Her skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and her eyes, when she finally looked at him, were the color of deep water, with no pupils or irises. Jacob felt a cold dread wash over him, but the singing continued, holding him in place as effectively as any physical restraint. The woman stopped singing and spoke, her voice carrying the same melodic quality as her song. "You've come at last," she said, though Jacob had the strange feeling she wasn't speaking to him specifically, but to someone she had been waiting for. "I've been waiting so long." Jacob found himself unable to speak, his mind racing with questions he couldn't form into words. The woman raised a hand, gesturing toward the water behind her. "They're in there," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "All of them, waiting with me." Jacob followed her gaze, his eyes widening as he saw what she was indicating. Beneath the clear water, dozens of figures stood motionless, their forms translucent and shimmering like heat haze. They appeared to be both men and women, dressed in clothing from various time periods, their expressions frozen in a mixture of longing and despair. Jacob realized with horror that these were the spirits of people who had been lured to their deaths by the same singing that had drawn him here. The woman continued, "I was the first, drowned in this lake over a century ago, but the water wouldn't let me go. It kept me here, made me part of itself. Now I sing to others, drawing them to join me. Not because I want to, but because I must. It's the nature of this place to collect, to hold, to never let go." Jacob felt a profound sense of pity for the woman, trapped in a cycle of death and loneliness for over 100 years. As if to demonstrate her point, the singing began again, though this time it came from all the figures beneath the water, creating a chorus of beautiful, mournful voices that filled the night air. Jacob felt his resolve weakening, his desire to join them growing stronger with each passing moment. He took a step toward the water, his hand reaching out as if to touch one of the figures beneath the surface. The woman watched him, her expression unreadable. "It's peaceful here," she said. "No pain, no loneliness, just waiting." What happened next was documented in Jacob's official report and later verified by physical evidence. As Jacob was about to step into the water, his service weapon, which had become entangled in his shirt during his approach, fell to the ground and discharged. The loud crack of the gunshot broke the spell, causing the singing to stop abruptly. Jacob shook his head as if waking from a dream, the full horror of his situation crashing down on him. He scrambled backward, away from the water and the woman who stood on the shore. The woman watched him go, her expression shifting from melancholy to something that looked like relief. "Go," she said, her voice losing its melodic quality and becoming simply tired. "While you still can. Tell them what happens here. Maybe someday someone will find a way to free us all." As she spoke, her form began to fade, becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. The figures beneath the water dissolved as well, leaving only clear, dark water where they had been moments before. Jacob didn't hesitate, running back to his boat and restarting the engine with fumbling hands. He gunned the throttle, speeding away from the area as fast as his vessel would travel. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of the landing, his heart pounding and his hands shaking so badly that he could barely secure the boat. He radioed dispatch with a garbled report that would later be transcribed as "encounter with distressed individual and possible drowning victims." The official investigation that followed found no evidence of the woman or the figures Jacob had described. Sonar scans of the area revealed nothing unusual beneath the lake's surface, and no missing persons reports matched the time period or description the woman had given. The official report, filed under incident number 230414L, noted Jacob's emotional state and the possibility that fatigue and disorientation had contributed to his experience, though it stopped short of calling it a hallucination. Jacob Landry continued his patrols on Lac des Allemands for another 6 months before requesting a transfer to a different parish. He never heard the swamp siren's song again, though he often felt her presence during his night patrols, a lingering sadness that seemed to emanate from the lake itself. The experience changed his perspective on the natural world and the unseen forces that sometimes influence it. "I used to think the swamp was just a place," he told a colleague shortly after his transfer. "But now I understand it's a living thing, with memories and desires of its own. Sometimes those desires are deadly." The swamp siren of Lac des Allemands remains one of the most compelling mysteries in the annals of Louisiana game warden encounters, a warning that beauty can sometimes be the most dangerous lure of all. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, but nowhere is this more true than in the Louisiana Bayou. These waterways, with their ancient cypress trees and murky waters, hold secrets that surface only in darkness, revealing themselves to those who patrol alone in the dead of night. The game wardens we've heard from tonight, Marc Dubois, Sarah Chenier, Marcus Thibodeau, Ben Romero, Elena Rodriguez, Thomas LeBlanc, Marie Fontenot, and Jacob Landry, are trained observers of the natural world, experts in reading the signs and sounds of the wilderness. Yet each of them encountered something that defied their training and challenged their understanding of reality. What connects these disparate experiences is not just location, but the profound sense that the bayou is a place where the normal rules don't always apply. The whispering reeds of the Atchafalaya Basin, the floating light of Caddo Lake, the phantom boat of Lake Pontchartrain, the alligator man of Honey Island Swamp, the disappearing cabin of Maurepas Swamp, the silent caller of Manchac Swamp, the phantom hunters of Barataria Preserve, and the swamp siren of Lac des Allemands, each represents a mystery that remains unsolved, a question that lingers long after the official reports have been filed and forgotten. These encounters share common threads: equipment malfunction, temperature drops, voices from unknown sources, and figures that appear and disappear like smoke. They also share a profound emotional impact on those who experience them, leaving lasting impressions that change perspectives and alter careers. The bayou doesn't just challenge our understanding of the natural world, it challenges our understanding of time itself, revealing moments where the past and present collide, where memories take physical form, and where the boundary between life and death becomes as thin and permeable as the morning fog. The official documentation of these incidents tells only part of the story. The complete truth lies in the quiet moments after the encounters, the sleepless nights, the recurring dreams, the cautious glances over the shoulder on subsequent patrols. It lies in the way these experiences connect to deeper questions about consciousness, memory, and what it means to exist in a world that may be far more complex and mysterious than we normally perceive. The bayou holds these stories like water in its cupped hands, revealing them only to those who are patient enough or unfortunate enough to be listening at the right moment. The recurring motifs that appear throughout these encounters, radio voices, footprints that lead nowhere, objects returned to impossible locations, and the profound silence that precedes and follows each encounter suggest patterns that we don't yet understand. They hint at a hidden layer of reality that operates according to rules we have yet to discover, a realm where thought and form are interchangeable, where the past is as accessible as the present, and where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds are more porous than we normally allow ourselves to believe. For the game wardens who patrol these waterways, the Bayou is both a workplace and a teacher, revealing lessons that can't be found in training manuals or procedural guidelines. It teaches humility in the face of the unknown, respect for forces beyond human control, and acceptance of the fact that some questions may never have answers. These lessons come at a cost: sleepless nights, altered careers, and the knowledge that some experiences can't be fully shared or understood by those who weren't there. But they also come with a deeper understanding of the world and our place within it. The stories we've explored tonight represent only a fraction of the unexplained encounters that occur in America's wild places each year. Most go undocumented, dismissed as tricks of the mind or exaggerations born from fatigue and isolation. But for those who experience them, the reality is undeniable and life-changing. The Bayou doesn't care whether we believe in its mysteries. It continues to operate according to its own ancient rhythms, revealing itself only when and how it chooses, to those who are paying attention. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The most compelling accounts often come from ordinary people who have experienced something extraordinary, and each story adds to our understanding of the mysteries that surround us. The Sleepless Campfire community is built on these shared experiences, creating a space where the unexplained can be explored without judgment or ridicule. Thank you for watching Sleepless Campfire. Until next time, stay safe out there.